Okay, so welcome everybody to this course, our first course in a number of courses where we are looking at elements of a gentleman are. And of course, we are part of the Society of Ordinary Gentlemen, a society whose objective is to distill the elements, distill the characteristics of a gentleman, and to share them with the world. And in doing so, we hope that the world will become a more pleasant place because of individuals' efforts to understand and embody what it means to be a gentleman, which is a very multi-dimensional, multifaceted thing. So let's dive into the course. So as I say, it's our first case study on on this, and today we're going to be looking at a fictional character. So in other courses we will look at real life people, but today we're going to start off with a fictional character from a wonderful novel called A Gentleman in Moscow by Mr. Amor Towles. And this is a character called Count Alexander Rostov. So he is a Russian aristocrat, a Russian aristocrat in the times of great upheaval in Russia before the First World War, during the Russian Revolution. So here's the book, and wonderfully, the book has also been turned into a Netflix series, or not a Netflix series. I think it's on Paramount Plus actually, but it's been turned into a TV series, TV show, shall we say, with the wonderful Ewan McGregor playing the role of the Count. So you can go and enjoy the book, and you can also enjoy watching the TV series. So I should give you all a huge spoiler alert. I will be completely divulging the whole story during this course. So if you don't want to know that, and you because you'd like to read the book or the watch the TV show first, then I suggest you go and do that, and you can come back to this course afterwards. But if you're happy to know what actually occurs during the book and why it's such a wonderful book, and it's a rich source of information about how to be a gentleman, then let's press on. So a little bit of an introduction to myself. I'm Rene Balhume, and I shared a little bit of a legacy with the Count. My family are an aristocratic family as well, from the Normandy lands, Viking blood in us, and we're very honoured to be involved with the society and to prepare and host this course for you. So a quick look at the cast of characters. So the book revolves around the Count and a cast of characters in a hotel in Russia, and we will be meeting all of these various characters who are either people working at the hotel or guests or people interacting with the hotel. So the setting, as I said, it's actually after World War One, but before World War Two. So it's set in Moscow in Russia between 1922 and 1954 at a hotel which is a real hotel. There is a picture of it there. The hotel Metropol at the bottom. At the top we have the Kremlin, um, and the famous that famous church in Moscow. So yes, at the bottom is the actual Hotel Metropol, and it's set during a very key period in Russia, but also in sort of global history, which is the Russian Revolution occurring in the 1917 to 1920s, with the Bolsheviks replacing the aristocrats essentially, and then how that sort of consolidated in the up into the decades after into the Soviet Union, the first communist state. So as I say, it's set during the Russian Revolution, so really a terrible time for most in Russia. But things were going bad already, and as we know, World War One really upended or ended many empires, dynasties, governments, and Russia was no different. And you had these sort of opportunistic um, opportunistic individuals who saw an opportunity to seize power. They did it under the guise of Marxist theory of overturning the capitalists and placing power and wealth back in the hands of the people. But as we all know, perhaps that didn't quite occur, and certainly power remained centralized at the top, not in the hands of the people. But anyway, this sets the background to what occurred to the Count. And let's not have any biases here about Russians. The Russians are always our geopolitical rivals, but they are one of the great races and one of the great cultures. And we will note in the course that suffering is a profoundly Russian sentiment. It's suffering is an unavoidable shadow of life, and sometimes its most meaningful part. So let's have a quick look at the scenes that we're going to go through. We're going to go through these 10 scenes, and then we'll have a bit of a conclusion at the end, and then we'll have a summary of some of the best quotes from the book. So let's introduce the Count. So the Count, born in 1889 to one of the oldest aristocratic families in Russia, had a classical European education, and of course spent his time with diplomats, artists, and the cultural elite of the times. And as we'll see, during the Russian Revolution, many aristocrats were killed, including the Tsar Alexander himself, and his family was slaughtered. But the Count wasn't killed. He was, as we'll see, he was up in front of a committee, but they instead decided to place him under a lifelong house arrest in the Metropol Hotel. So he was meant to not leave the hotel ever, otherwise he would be shot if he was seen outside it. So Rostov is a man governed by an internal code of honor that as we could see, no regime could confiscate, no matter how brutal the political change and the regime that came in and swept the old one away, they could never confiscate his code of honor. He is a man who is observant rather than loud. He is courageous without bravado. He's deeply loyal to those under his protection. His optimism is disciplined, his humor dry. And we will see his dry form of humor as a real social grace. And the reason for that is because he has a sense of humor that puts others at ease without needing to impress. He doesn't do silly things like practical jokes, which do cause humor, but at the expense of someone else. He's always there to uplift people. He's always ready with a witty remark. He has a finely tuned palate. For example, there's a scene where he spots that there's a bit of nettle or not sage in a dish. Why is that? Because the Count is always present. He's always in the moment, especially when eating. He is present. He has an understated resilience. He is a man who adapts without surrendering. He is elegant under pressure. He is kind. And when we say kindness, we mean an instinct to help and uplift. But he is kind without sentimentality. That means he's not needy. He doesn't need applause or approval. He's not virtue signaling. That is not because he's soft or naive, of course, or a people pleaser. He just does it because that is who he is. The Count is not someone who calls attention to the social shortcomings of others, though. And he believes that the way one lives matters more than what one is allowed to possess. He does not rage against fate. He outwits it through grace, routine, and the cultivation of meaning in small, deliberate acts. And there is a bit of a noble futility about the Count. You know, all the small things he does, they probably don't really matter, nor will they change the world, and nor will they ever even be remembered. But how one lives, especially when unseen, is the whole point. Because it is right, because it is beautiful, and because a commitment to higher standards persists, even or especially when the world forgets and no one cares. So let's dive into a little bit more about what it means to be an aristocrat, because this is very important to our lesson today. An aristocrat is someone who is held to a higher standard than others and who accepts that burden. Now, this is not because he is better in nature. It's not because he was granted position, education, cultivation, and trust. Not because he was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. It's because he holds himself to those standards that his failures matter more. And when an aristocrat behaves poorly, he is not merely rude or foolish. He is in violation of a compact. He has betrayed the privilege that excuses his existence. So it's the to be an aristocrat is all about a standard, a higher standard than others that you yourself uphold, and the punishment for failing to meet that standard is grave. And this is a key part of the book. We're going to meet Colonel Osip, and one of the lessons that Colonel Osip learns. Now, Colonel Osip is a colonel in the Red Army. He's not an aristocrat, but the Count teaches him that about some people being need to be shot and others not needing to be shot. And this was something that we don't, of course, have anymore. But in times gone by, we had the concept of dueling with dueling pistols. And if a gentleman's honor had been offended, they would want to seek something what they would call satisfaction, and they would essentially go somewhere, and it would be determined on the gravity of the offence given as to how close they would stand next to each other, and then they would each have a shot at firing these pistols at each other, and someone might be injured, someone might be killed, they might both miss. But here what you see is the the punishment for failing to uphold standards can is fatal if you are an aristocrat. There has to be a harsh punishment because you are being held to higher standard. It's not about the fact that you're rich and privileged and born into a wealthy family. It's about the standard that comes with that and the duty and expectation that comes with that at all times, even when you're alone and no one can see you, even when you're thinking in your head. Now, what we see in the book is there's two instances of this. Now, first of all, there's a hussar. So this was a sort of grandly dressed, always grandly dressed light cavalry officer in many European armies back in the day. So this is a good picture of what a hussar would look like. So he would be on a horseback with a sword. And we have Lieutenant Pulianov. Now, in the book, the lieutenant meets the count at a ball. And unfortunately, the lieutenant makes a bit of a fool of himself. He wants the hand of the princess hosting the ball, but he gets a little bit too drunk. He overeats a little instead of paying attention to the lady, princess. And the count outwits him. The count takes advantage of him eating the food. As you can imagine, he's in the army and he hasn't probably eaten well, and then he's at this ball, and the count takes advantage of that to chat to the princess and get to know her. He then gets a little bit too drunk and he can't dance with the princess. And then last of all, the count outplays him at a game of hands and wins a lot of money from him. So the count, in some ways foolishly, in his youth, humiliated this gentleman at a ball. And in revenge, the hussar, who's obviously a very unpleasant man and deserved everything he got, really, he seduces the count's sister, and then breaks her heart by actually attempting to sleep with one of the servant girls at the house. So he attempts to not just break her heart, actually to humiliate her. And the count is there when this happens and chases him down and shoots him. He doesn't kill him immediately, but he's badly injured and he's later killed in battle. Now the Colonel Klepikov asks the Count, why did you shoot the guy? He's an aristocrat. Surely that means he shouldn't be shot. And the Count states, well, I shot him because he was an aristocrat. And this is the key point. He had to shoot him because they're both aristocrats and should be held to certain standards. He must be shot. Now these days, obviously we don't shoot people, but an aristocrat should be sh and may be shot symbolically, socially, morally. And the punishment is not cruelty. It's an accountability proportionate to the privilege. Now, in contrast to this, we come across the very petty Comrade Leblevsky, who the Count refers to as the bishop. And he starts off as a not a very good waiter in the hotel restaurant, but he does end up being the actual manager of the hotel, and he's always trying to make the Count's life hard. And during his escape, which is at the end of the book, which we'll see, the the Count actually ties and locks up the bishop in the basement. And later, when the army are investigating the Count's escape, a lieutenant asks the colonel, why didn't Rostov shoot him when he had the chance? And of course, the colonel, who now understands this concept of being shot or not, states, well, obviously not, because he was not an aristocrat. Therefore, you see the Count, whilst he sort of detested the bishop, he understood that the bishop was not an aristocrat, and therefore he was not held to the same standards, and his behavior in some ways could be excused. So here we have a concluding definition of an aristocrat. So, grace is extended to you until it's not. Mistakes are fewer but costlier. And you are forgiven less often because you should know better. And the Count Rostov understands this instinctively, which we'll see later very clearly in the barbershop scene. And that is why aristocracy is not a costume, nor a title, nor nostalgia, but a sentence that one lives under voluntarily. You voluntarily live under that sentence. And if you don't believe me in this, just look at the British royal family. Just look at the Queen. God bless her, before she passed. Look at what's happened to Prince Andrew, who's not even a prince now, how he's been severely punished for his poor behavior. And look at his sister and his brother, not the king, but Princess Anne and Prince Edward, who quietly get on with their duties, maintaining poise and grace at all times, never seeking acclaim. This is what it's all about. And it's something that we can build into our own lives. We don't need to be born into some family with a big house in the country. We can choose as gentlemen to be aristocrats in this modern world. And you do that by voluntarily holding yourself to a higher standard than the world requires of you. And I have broken these down into 5 ways that you would do that. So to be an aristocrat today is not necessarily to have a title, money, or pedigree. It is to hold yourself to these higher standards and accept the consequences when you fail. It is a burden you can place upon yourself. And the men who choose to do it, they do not complain when the standard is enforced, because they are the ones who set it. And here are the 5 points to this, I say. So firstly, to accept that you are judged more harshly and to welcome that. If you choose the aristocratic path, you do not ask, did I get away with it? Was this technically permitted? Did anyone notice? No. You correct yourself before the world has to, or even if the world will ever do. You hold yourself to standards others are not held to. You are punctual even when others are late. You are polite even when others are rude. You are restrained even when provoked. and you keep your word even when breaking it would be easier. This will feel unfair at times, but that is the point. I myself often struggle with this. It is not easy being a gentleman. I myself, for example, quite often get very upset if I don't get good service in restaurants or hotels. I can take it as a sort of personal slight. But as much as I would like to lose my temper, and I might be very right, by the way, I might well have been treated badly. To be a gentleman and an aristocrat is to remain poised, to not be provoked in those moments. You might correct the situation with charm and elegance. You don't lose your temper, for example. And what we see is in the book is the bishop behaves terribly and suffers no consequences because nothing higher is expected of him. And you, as a gentleman, may well choose a different category and path. You may choose the path of a higher purpose. Thirdly, you police your behavior in small, unseen moments. The aristocracy is revealed when no applause is possible. This is how you speak to waiters, clerks, and staff, how you behave when inconvenienced, how you handle irritation, boredom, or delay, how you conduct yourself when disappointed, how you dress when alone or when you set the table for dining alone, how you keep your living space when there are no guests, and even how you talk to yourself in your head. Number four, cultivate an inner judge stronger than any external one. The aristocrat does not need rules shouted at him. He carries a mirror. And Rostov, we will see, looks at himself in the barber's mirror after he makes a brief error and fails to hold his standard. What we'll see is that he quickly reprimands himself, seeing the truth and resetting. The questions you may ask yourself: did I act with dignity this morning, this afternoon, this evening? Where did I fall below my standard? What will I correct going forward? You might do this 2 or 3 times during the day, perhaps at lunchtime, perhaps at the end of the afternoon before the evening starts, and perhaps at the end of the evening. And look, this is not about self-flagellation or nor of making yourself feel guilty. You will fail often. You will fail daily. But you just want to have calm, exacting honesty and an intention to do better the next time. And finally, the fifth element is to understand the price that needs to be paid and to pay it willingly. To live as an aristocrat means fewer excuses, less indulgence, higher consequences for lapses. But what it also means is greater self-respect, an inner order, a quiet authority that others will instantly recognize, and a greater positive impact on the world and those around you. No, you are not trying to be admired. You are trying to elevate the consciousness of yourself and your fellow men and women. Now, before we go to our first scene, I would just like to look at a couple of individuals, which is the Grand Duke in the book. Now, the Grand Duke, and we also have here the beautiful Helena, which is the sister of the Count, and the Grand Duke is the godfather of the Count. Now, the Count's parents tragically died young, and Helena and the Count were brought up by their godfather and grandmother. His godfather, the Grand Duke Demidov. Now, this gentleman really had some toughness about him. He prized hard work. He was always dressed well. He was never idle. He never drank. He was always industrious. He was brave, and he was a good guardian to the Count. And he is the one that said to the Count that a man must master his circumstances and never let them master him. And this is probably the only thing you need to really remember from the book is that line there. That is the key. That is the key theme of the book. That is the key theme of the book. And really, the Count does have a bit of a tragic life. Even though he's privileged, he's not starving in the street, it's true. But nevertheless, he has a bit of a tragic life. But he He overcomes it with grace and does a lot of good, as we will see. So let's look at our first scene, which is the censored scene of the Count and Misha's poem. So the the Count was sentenced really for being an aristocrat. So during the Russian Revolution, the revolutionaries seized power and effectively wiped out the aristocratic class, landowning class, asset owning class, power wielding class, um, who one might say were the finest people that the culture had produced. But we won't get that into that here. There's could argue that there's many a European country that has never really recovered from the wiping out of their best men during the First World War, and to some extent also during the Second World War, but particularly during the First World War. And as we see in things here like the Russian Revolution, this aristocratic class were wiped out. The gentlemen were wiped out. Now, it's not to say they were all good. There were a lot of landowning aristocrats who were playing the game in their favor, and wealth wasn't flowing down to the normal people. We can talk about that, but there is to some extent there is something to be said that the best men and women were were wiped out during this period, and perhaps we haven't really ever recovered from that. Now, what's interesting here is that one of the Count's great friends is Misha, who is who was a poet and I would say an intellectual, and the Count is actually sentenced to house arrest, and they were probably going to kill him because they accused him of writing this poem, which was antagonistic. But the Count is very charming during the trial, um, and the people in the gallery are laughing and finding the Count very amusing. And the Ignatov, the gentleman there who's sentencing him, uh, decides not to have him killed because of his charm, because he won over the gallery, and instead sentences him to house arrest at the hotel. As Ignatov says, he said, history has shown charm to be the final ambition of the leisure class. He sort of shows disgust at the charm of the Count. And then we find out later that the Count never mentioned that he didn't write the poem. They ask him if he wrote the poem, and his answer was it just demanded to be written. And it later turns out there was actually Misha that wrote the poem. So the Count, even there, he could have easily have said, "Well, I didn't write it; it was someone else that wrote it." But even there, he was prepared to die to uphold and protect his friend. The Count then, the Count then is sentenced, and Misha sort of pops in and out of the book. Misha is a sort of man at one point who's profoundly out of step with his times. He's a sort of an intellect that that perhaps wasn't experiencing the fullness of life. But then, as times change, he then becomes a man who's profoundly in step with the times, um, and he becomes sort of quite powerful with the revolutionaries. But then he also has a downfall as well, um, due to him sticking to his own standards, actually. So our second scene then is the Count arriving at the hotel, and he is then confined to a small room. Now, what's um what's very interesting with this scene, and this is a lesson that we can take, is the guards are moving him here into this small room before he lived in the grand suite, and he's as you can imagine, the revolutionaries have already burnt down the family estate. They've stolen all of the family assets, and they tell the Count he can only take a few things from the room, and then obviously they will be getting rid of everything. Um, he doesn't let the guards get away with bullying him around too much, though. they're eyeing up a bottle of whiskey, and he can see that they want it, and he picks that up. So he doesn't let them push him around too much. Um, but he says a few things. For example, he takes greater pride in knowing that it's a gentleman's presence, announced by his bearing, his remarks, and his manners, and not his clothing and his possessions that make him. And there's lots of little things in the scene. The Count, when he's in this room, he hits his head on the roof, and he sort of says, "Oh, just so," or "quite so," or and he says, "Oh well, probably for the best that I've got this smaller room and less possessions." He maintains his dignity. He acknowledges the reality of his situation. He doesn't rail against it. And he maintains this conversational formality, even when speaking to himself. He accepts the removal of his privilege and his titles, and he cares more about the feelings of the person delivering the messages. He cares more about the soldiers and the bellhops helping him move. He accepts his reality and moves on quickly. He doesn't cling to possessions because he knows that his true goal is who he is, who he's become. On some of the slides during this course, I have put in a lot of wording, and I will you can pause the recording and read them in your own time. So I thought I put the monologue here, how the Count didn't place too much gravity on possessions. Despite being a very wealthy aristocrat, you'd think that would be the opposite, wouldn't you? But that's a key lesson here. And as we noted, it wasn't just his possessions that were taken from him. He used to have to be referred to as His Excellency or Your Grace. But the manager of the hotel, Mr. Halecki, has to inform him that he can no longer be called that, and that all the staff members are being instructed to no longer call him by such grand titles. And the Count, you would expect him to be angry with that. But all the Count is thinking is he can see that the manager is uncomfortable and embarrassed to tell him of this. And so, not thinking at all about himself and his misfortune, he merely says, "It is the business of the times to change, Mr. Hilaki, and it is the business of gentlemen to change with them." He knew the perfect thing to put the other man at ease, even though he was the one that was getting the raw end of the news. And this is a real example of a gentleman. And I think also this concept of changing with the times, there is a need to maintain standards, maintain the glory of the old ways, but to also fluidly move with them. Now, our third shop is it's a minor scene in the book, but there's a very important lesson in it. And this is when the Count is at the barbershop. So the Count religiously keeps a weekly appointment for a trim of his beard. This is sort of was a part of his way of coping with his confinement, but also as a gentleman, it is part of his habit, order, and discipline. Now, thinking that the Count was above the queue, he casually took the next place after the barber was done with the previous person, and he dismissed a man who was actually waiting before him. And the Count saw that the man was just a worker, and he sort of wondered why he was in the hotel. And he just said to the man, "Well, I'm sorry, I know you're next, but I have a weekly standing appointment at this time." And he sat down. And the man who'd been waiting was furious at being cut in like that. And he stepped forward, grabbed a pair of scissors, and he cut off the Count's moustache and then stormed off. And the barber was very apologetic to the Count. He said, "Oh my God, I'm so embarrassed. This man was a thug. He will never be allowed to come in here again." But the Count caught himself, and he said he was perfectly right. And what happened was that the Count immediately realized that he'd had a minor lapse in manners in the barbershop. But he understood that minor lapses matter. They ripple out into how you are perceived and how you perceive yourself. The Count immediately saw his fault. He immediately saw it. And he immediately punishes himself and reasserts discipline. And so what he does is he turns to the barber and he says, "Give me a clean shave, my friend." The Count chooses to have a full clean shave. And in a world of gentlemen, a clean shave is a classic way to restore appearances and by extension, composure. And there is sometimes a moment in your life when as a man, you are confronted not with who you think you are, but what you've actually become. And in that moment, the Count Rostov in the barber's chair saw that he had some rudeness in him. And so he corrected himself and punished himself immediately. So what this teaches us is that a gentleman corrects himself before the world has to. And he looks in the mirror to see who he really is, not who he thinks he is. Okay, so scene four now. So now we're going to get to the ladies in the Count's life. So we have Nadia, Sofia, and Anna. And here they are in their various stages. We have the Nina as a young lady and as an older lady at the top, and then we have Sofia at the bottom. And we also have Anna. So Anna is a famous actress who's a guest at the hotel. Nina is a guest also at the hotel. And then Sophia is actually Nina's daughter. And yeah, so firstly with Nina, um, she becomes a sort of friend of the Count. I think this is a sort of example of the Count being so gracious and such a gentleman that he can form a friendship with a young lady, and they sort of end up having dinner together and getting to know each other. But what happens is that when Nina's older, she she returns to the hotel with a child, a young baby called Sophia, and she asks the Count, can you just look after Sophia for a week or so, because she has to go to the depths of Russia to find her husband. Now, unfortunately, Nina disappears and never returns, and so Sophia is left as an orphan effectively, and becomes the adopted daughter of the Count. And of course, this was a great inconvenience to the Count and far from ideal. But he goes on to note that during his life, it's the inconveniences that mattered the most to him. And he becomes a very good father to Sophia and very proud of her. And she turns into a magnificent young lady. And so here she is, Sophia, um, as a young child. And I think one of the other lessons here is sometimes we don't have time to think, when someone asks us to do something big for them. And sometimes there's only one acceptable result, which is to not think of yourself and just say yes and do what needs to be done. Uh, a gentleman wouldn't really think about how things impact him. When a friend asks for a time of need, the last thing they would think about is the impact on them. They would help where they can. So, see, Sophia grows up to be a magnificent young lady, extremely intelligent and a masterful piano player. And she naturally has a lot of the characteristics of the Count. Um, she's a gentleman. She's a lady. And for example, there's a time where she's under great pressure and she just takes a deep breath and says, "There's no time for that." And what she's saying is, there's no time for her to get overly emotional or selfish or feeling sorry for herself. She just says to herself, "There's no time for that," and she gets on with what she has to do. So she's also a great example of a gentleman. And while this is a course that's probably going to be listened to more by men, ladies are very welcome here, and every lesson that we're drawing out here for men apply equally to ladies. So now we turn to Anna. So Anna is the sort of great romance for the Count during the book. She's, as we've noted, is a famous actress, and they first meet when the Count is walking through the lobby and Anna is checking into the hotel, and she has these two enormous hunting dogs with her, and they are really out of control, and she's failing to control them. And the Count just whistles, and the dogs stop, and he whistles again, and they come and sit next to him. So Anna comes over, obviously impressed with the Count for his mastery. But there's this dialogue here which is worth you reading, and there's quite a lot going on here in this dialogue because there's a lot of innuendo, a lot to be read between the lines. And of course, on the face of it, it looks like she's talking about the dogs, but really she's talking about him. And she sort of starts off by accusing him of being ill-bred, and he counters back. And what the Count here does, he puts her right in her place because as a famous actress, she's used to men groveling over her and apologizing and all of this sort of thing. Where the Count uh, sort of stands firm against her, and he even goes back saying, you know, that basically he's a firm hand that knows what he's doing, and you can see here that at one point it sounds like he's talking about her or she's talking about him, and there's really sort of a bit of a back and forth here between them. So they sort of, if you like, they square each other up, they test each other, and they stand up to each other. And some wonderful scenes in the book because they do become a great couple in the end. But the Count has put Anna in her place, and she does invite him to her room, and they have a sexual encounter in her room. And on the way out, the Count sort of picks his clothes up and leaves, but he also picks some of her clothes up, and he puts like her blouse back up on a hanger. And later on, we find that we learn that Anna is basically falling in love with him because she is furious later with the Count for having the nerve to pick her clothes up, to put her clothes on a hanger. And what she does is she starts throwing all of her clothes on the floor, and worse, she actually picks all her clothes up and throws them out the window. And what we learn here is that Anna is feeling indignation. Now, this is something that you must always, as a gentleman, hope a woman will feel towards you. And indeed, you should cultivate. The indignation is not just a protest, it is proof of emotional engagement. To a woman, a man can provoke genuine indignation is a man she already allowed into her psyche. And this is the double bind of the feminine heart. It craves tenderness, but it despises being disarmed. So Anna was furious. She was full of venom, and she threw her entire wardrobe out the window. Not because she hated the Count, but because she loved him and she couldn't bear it. And so I think a lesson here is a woman truly in love may find herself needing to hate you just for a moment, just enough to feel safe, just enough to fight the power she feels you have over her. It's not reasoned, it's not fair, it's real. And I would suggest to you that a woman is not really in love with you if she hasn't hated you yet. She doesn't hate you yet. So don't be scared as a gentleman when a woman is furious and angry with you. In fact, that's when you know you've got her. So perhaps a final note on the Count with women. He meets the universe halfway with women. He merely tilts the odds in his favor by taking some action. For example, early on before his confinement, the Count meets some charming young ladies in a bakery. He considers whether he should sit on a park bench to facilitate bumping into them later. So that was an interesting scene in the book. And I thought what was interesting there was the Count discerns from not being a full-on stalker of some women that you've spotted that you want to talk to the opposite of just merely engineering an opportunity. And I think that's a little lesson here. Something that the Count would engineer an opportunity if it can be done with grace. And when I say grace, it's a word that we use a lot. And what that means is sort of courteous goodwill. It's being polite and respectful and considerate and charming in how you approach a lady. It must always be the way you approach her must always be done in a way that just will always leave her walking away in a more positive mood. And you're not stalking her or trying to force something. You're just giving fate a little nudge. Uh, Never be seen to be pushing fate down the stairs. Don't overdo it. Sure, the exchange with a lady is always with grace by ensuring it only uplifts a young lady and never makes her uncomfortable. But as we see, don't be scared to gentlemanly engineer the odds in your favor. And then I've also included a long monologue here about the confederacy of the humbled. And really what this is about, because obviously the Count has had his downfall, his stripping or his attempted stripping of his graciousness. And Anna also has a downfall. She falls down from being a famous actress to an older actress and not so well regarded. And there's a monologue here on how you can deal with that, how you can maintain maintain your standards and your conduct and your goodwill and your grace when this happens to you, and not fall into self pity or suffering. Okay, then. So then we come on to a very important part of the book, which is sadly where the Count does consider suicide. So at some point in the book, the Count cannot go on um, just living in the hotel. I think this is after about 4 or 5 years in confinement, and he goes up to the roof of the hotel, and he's going to jump off and kill himself. He decided, but then he ends up bumping into the a beekeeper on the roof of the hotel, and they end up having a conversation. And the count the count immediately decides that he's not going to kill himself, but he's going to find purpose. And so, despite being an aristocrat, he actually walks into the restaurant of the hotel and asks, "I would like to become a waiter." Now, obviously, some people would say, "Well, he lowered himself, and it would have been better to commit suicide than become a mere waiter." But no, the count knew that he had to find a purpose to keep living, and it didn't matter what it was. And actually, he, of course, being a an aristocrat and a man of culture and class, his knowledge, skill, and experience made him an extremely good waiter, and he becomes the head waiter of the hotel. And of course, his service to many to many people was exemplary, and he becomes known throughout Moscow for being the best waiter and someone that can be relied upon to ensure things are done to the highest standards. But the Count here, even in the darkest hour, manages to keep living, to find some sort of purpose, and to do the role. Doesn't matter what role you're doing, to do it to the highest level. Now, the Count is often found in the bar of the hotel, the Shalypin bar, and it's worth a few. I thought it was worth a few notes here on that as well. Um, why? Because the Count is a man who's social, and he always seeks out convivial company. And he knows that we quite often go to a bar to meet other people and to hear how they're doing and to let them pour their soul out to you. So there's a few good scenes. There's a scene with a bit of a grumpy German and a spirited young Brit, and the Count is always witty, intelligent, and charming with these people that he meets in the bar. He meets an American who turns out sort of an American spy, And yeah, I think the lesson here is to be prepared. To be prepared. There's a scene also with three ballerinas that the Count meets in the bar. And as he says here, it would be very inappropriate to not go and join some young ladies on their own. Now, as a young man, you might be shy and scared to go and talk to some young ladies alone in a bar. But as a gentleman, he knows that actually his duty is to go and talk to them. He remarks on their beauty. He inquires what brings them to Moscow. He congratulates them on their achievements. He insists on paying for their wine. He chats to them about their hometowns, and he even offers to perform a card trick for them. The Count can always be counted for his wit, intelligence, and charm. And I think the lesson here is to make yourself interesting. Read, learn, experience. Prepare yourself to be able to chat up some ballerinas, to be able to do a shot with a ballerina. Well, sorry, to be able to do a shot with a billionaire, or to have a beer with a working class football fan. Do you walk into a place with the intention and the preparedness to bring life to the place and to anyone in there? Or do you walk in somewhere thinking of what you can get out of it? The Count could always be counted upon as a drinker in a bar or a dinner companion to liven a conversation. He was instinctively aware of all the temperaments in a room, and he knew whether to spark a conversation, to top up a glass, or to do what needed to be done to raise those around him. And it's all about being prepared and that this concept of making yourself an interesting person. Do you know what's going on in the world? Have you read widely? For example, I myself used to read The Economist magazine because I wanted to know about what's happening in multiple different things in the airline industry, in the boating industry, what's going on with oil and gas, what's happening in Vietnam, etc., etc. You need to know a little bit about everything to be an interesting person, and to further, once you've studied that, to start forming your own opinions on things. What do you think? What feels right and wrong to you? To form your own, and that's what makes someone interesting. They formed their own views. They've read and considered things, and then you can walk into a bar and be interesting. And you also need to learn how to raise other people, to not be scared to talk to people you don't know, and to do it with love, to do it with an intention to only raise them. If you can do that, you will be amazed at how many people will enter your life. And I should just point out here that the Count, yes, he liked to drink, but he was never obviously drunk, very rarely. He would always maintain himself. So it's certainly not about going getting drunk in bars. It's about being in places where people let their let their guard down a bit, maybe a little bit of alcohol to help that. That's what a bar's all about. Okay, so now let's look at the Count's conduct in the Boyarsky, which is the main restaurant in the Hotel Metropol, and this is actually a real life restaurant. And here it is here, magnificent room with the fountain in the middle and the great glass roof. And this is probably the scene of my favorite scene in the whole book. So we have the bishop involved when he's a mere waiter. So here on the left is him as a waiter. On the right, we have him later in life as the manager of the hotel. Um, but we have a fantastic scene where there is a young couple on a date in the Boyarsky. As I say, this is my favorite scene in the whole book. We have a young man on a date with a very serious girl. He's nervous and he's trying too hard to impress her with politics. Then he opens up about something personal, the fact that he loved the Nutcracker play and going to see it with his grandmother. Now this softens the girl, and the Count is obviously watching all this happening, and he sort of says, "Oh, well done, you've been too serious before, and now you found something emotional, and it softened her up." And just as he's as the young man's doing that, the bishop walks in, and the count it cannot believe that the bishop is such a stupid waiter that he didn't realize that he should have waited, because what the count is aware, you see, of what's really going on. The bishop doesn't. He's not emotionally intelligent or reading the room, reading the interaction. He could have seen that there's a moment when to come and ask them for what they want to eat. He should have seen they want a date. He could have seen that the conversation is softening the girl up, and he should have waited. But he interrupts just when she's about to ask a question to the young man. He then pushes them to order too soon. He recommends an expensive wine that doesn't even go with the food. And the young man freezes. He doesn't know what to do. He probably can't even afford the wine. And the whole date is about to fall apart. But luckily for the young couple, they have a gentleman sat next to them. And so the Count steps in. He calmly suggests a better wine. He notes that a Georgian Mukazene would work perfectly with the Latvian stew. And he does it in a way that doesn't embarrass anyone. And he helps the young man regain confidence. Now, he also, of course, the wine is something that's very affordable as well. And he essentially rescues the date quietly and kindly. And the lesson from this is that being a gentleman means knowing when and how to help without showing off. It might mean that you don't help, by the way, or that if you do help, you do it at the right moment. The Count doesn't control the moment. He sort of gently guides it just enough. And that's real class. And this scene is fundamentally a masterclass in timing and energy awareness, the invisible language of social intelligence. What the Count understands and the bishop doesn't is that people speak through energy, not just words. The right moment is fragile. You feel it, not force it. Connection is forming, don't interrupt. Uncertainty is rising, step in gently. Offer help without making it about you. The Count reads the energy of the interaction in the room. The bishop barges through it. You hold back when it's not your place to interrupt or to intervene, or it's not the right moment. You act quickly, gently, and lightly at the right moment. And you let others shine and expect no credit. And so that's why the Count here steps in without being rude. He's not taking over the moment, he's simply protecting it. And later in the evening, the young couple actually raise a glass in the direction of the Count to thank him. I think that's my favorite scene in the whole book. It was such a simple like thing he did. His knowledge, his ability to observe and to see what's really going on, and to just be a sort of guiding gently hand. And I think that is really what it does mean to be an aristocrat and a gentleman. You know, you're that sort of soft guiding counsel and guiding hand, more in the background, on the side, not expecting a claim. Perhaps nobody even knows who you are, but you're sort of very gently guiding things, and preventing catastrophe from happening. And you do it in a sort of very gentle way. Now we have the Triumvirate. The Count forms, this is a short scene but important. The Count, when he becomes a waiter, he then forms a great working team with um, the head chef and the actual head waiter at the time. And the three of them form a great team. So you have obviously the head chef there in the middle with the beard, and the gentleman to the left is the other member of the threesome. And what this sort of scene is about is the importance of forming a high performing small team, close friends and colleagues who all hold themselves to the highest standards. That's an important thing to find in life as a gentleman, as an aristocrat, is to find other people that can maintain the standard and that you can do great things together. And the other lesson from here is you will never know when you will need your friends, but one day you will need them. And there is the time when the Count needed help. He needed help saving Sofia at one point because she hurts herself badly, and he needs help escaping. And of course, his friends are there for him when he needs them because of the years, the days, months, and years he spent building his friendship with them. There's also another scene in the book during his escape, which we'll come on to later, where there's a gentleman called Victor. He's actually the piano teacher to Sofia, and what he says is he very much helps the Count escape, and he says that he sort of almost doesn't understand why he helped him at great personal risk to himself, and he says it's because he felt a profound sense of loyalty, a sense of loyalty that was grounded in feelings of respect that Victor felt hard to articulate, and that his wife, for all her virtues, would never have understood. And it wasn't just because he felt it was right to do so, um, but he felt that he felt that there was this profound loyalty and respect that he'd had for the Count because of the way of the Count conducting himself, and he plays a key role in helping the Count escape. So I think what I wanted to show here was this the importance of being selfish and not expecting much from friends, but always cultivating friendships because there might be a day when you do really need them and they will be there for you without you even needing to ask. And then we come on to scene 9, which is the dinner with the colonel. So this is a very important part of the book. We've met this colonel. So this is a colonel in the Red Army, and he basically approaches the Count and says, "Look, I need you to educate me in Western culture. I want to be able to speak English, and I want to understand what the Americans and the West are all about. I want to understand them for when I'm interacting with them or facing them." And the Count doesn't ask for anything in return. In fact, the Colonel says, in return, I can make life a little bit easier for you. Yeah. And the Count just gracefully raises his hand and says, and to indicate there's no need for any exchange. I'd be happy to help you. And they go on to study a lot of they study by watching Western films. Um, and even though the Red Army Colonel lightly loathed aristocrats like the Count, he he knew he had use, and he goes on to greatly respect the Count. And I put here Casablanca because that does play a bit of a monologue in the book because they're studying the Humphrey Bogart film and other Hollywood movies from America. And there's a point where they know in particular Bogart in Casablanca. Well, there's a great commotion. Someone gets thrown out or arrested actually in the bar, and it looks like Rick, the character played by Humphrey Bogart, doesn't care. But the Count and the Colonel notice that after the commotion, Rick sets a cocktail glass upright. And what they took from that was that it shows that by the smallest of one's actions, one can restore some sense of order in the world. And this is why being a gentleman matters. It's your small little actions that can just restore order in a chaotic world. And in the end, during the Count's escape, the Colonel turns a blind eye. They He likely knows what's happened, and he sort of chooses just to ignore it. And there's also the scene, as we said, where Sofia is badly injured, and the Colonel um, organizes for her to be taken to the best hospital, and he also ignores that the Count had stepped outside the hotel. And he says that after 15 years of selfless service that he received from the Count, he's grateful to have been in service to him. And I think a point to take from that is that good work is never wasted. Never overly think too much about what you're getting out of good work because it will come back to you some way. It won't come back to you in a direct line. It won't be that you put something out and you get it something directly back from the same source. But you will get something back. It will come at a later date from the side, from something completely different. The energy exchange is always there. Whatever you put out, you will get back. It's an energetic principle. And the Count knows this. He's industrious without expecting anything back because he knows he knows that things will come back to him. Not that he does it because of that, but he understands the way the world works. So it does matter being a gentleman, and ensure you are one. Okay, and then we come to our final scene then, which is the Count does actually in the end escape from the hotel. Um, he realizes that he needs to get Sofia out of Russia, and so during a trip to Paris where she's playing the piano as part of a Russian delegation to Paris, he organizes her escape, and then the Count himself actually escapes, and he reunites with Anna in as peasants. They're dressed as peasants, and they are peasants, and they're in the deepest, darkest Russia, but they're reunited at the end. And it might be hard for anybody to ever trace the Count because they all think he's gone to Finland, and the only person that perhaps knows what's happened to him is the colonel, and he's chosen to let him escape. So the book does have a happy ending. He's reunited with Anna, and Sophia gets to safety. And then there is a sort of note that anybody else would have said that the Count was very unlucky, to have been locked up in the hotel. But in some ways, it turned out that he was the luckiest man in Russia because he was isolated from other things that were going on outside, like World War II happened when he was in the hotel. Um, he had the opportunity to be of great service. He had the opportunity to see what was going on because a lot of important people were at the hotel, and he served them at the hotel. Um, he was able to have a daughter. Now he wasn't able to meet a woman and have his own daughter, but a woman was, if you like, the universe dropped a daughter in his lap, and he was able to raise her and have her as part of his life. Um, and so, yeah, what turned out to be what turned out to be to someone else might have been a profound misfortune. Turned out it was a great fortune. Now, concluding comments, as we've said, you must always master your circumstances and never let them master you, no matter how negative they are. There's even there's a book by a gentleman called Viktor Frankl, which is about his life being locked in a concentration camp. He was a Jewish gentleman locked in a concentration camp during the Holocaust in World War II. And even to some extent, he was able to master those circumstances and not let them master him. So even in the darkest situations you can imagine, there is a way to master your circumstances. The second maxim from this is a note from the book, is that the surest sign of wisdom is constant cheerfulness. And I would say to you that, you must always master your circumstances without resentment, indignation, or nostalgia for the past or the way things were, but that also that cheerfulness is the highest spiritual practice. To remain cheerful no matter what. And so that concludes our course, our review of the Gentleman of Moscow. I have I have now a number of quotes that I've put on slides, and I'm not going to talk through them. I'm going to leave them on the screen and just click through them clearly, fastly and quickly. And of course, you can pause the video and read them yourself. Some of the book is just a never-ending mine of beautiful lessons and quotes. And there's probably other layers to this book that I haven't found that you might find. It's an incredible piece of work, and thank you for joining the course. And I will look forward to seeing you on our next one. And here they are, some final quotes. Have a great day.